Hello everybody, this is Zuri and welcome to my channel. Let's get started on today's video. Before we begin, I want to make sure that the drawing stays the right size. I begin by cutting a sheet of canvas paper to match my final 5x7 canvas panel. Next, I draw one horizontal line and one vertical line through the center of the paper. This gives me a simple guide to keep everything balanced. Then I add another horizontal line, 1 inch up from the bottom. This will mark the floor line for the scene. With the guidelines in place, I start the sketch. I begin with baby Jesus and then build the rest of the characters around him. I'm keeping my first line very light so I can easily erase if I need to adjust anything. Once the sketch looks right, I go back in, add the details, finishing touches to complete the drawing. Welcome to the coloring portion of the video, which is my favorite part. So I'm starting by putting out all of my paint colors I'll be using today. Since this is a mixed media piece, I'll be working with two mediums, acrylic paint and color markers. I got my 5x7 canvas panel ready, so I will begin with a thin layer of raw sienna at the bottom to create the floor area. Now, during the editing process, I realized that I did not film myself painting in the first sky layer, which was a total drag, but hey, it is what it is. But the color that I did end up using was a color called Phthalo Blue. I hope I pronounced that correctly, but the name of the paint will be listed in the description box, so no worries. So for the second sky layer, I mixed the blue with a little black, focusing most of the darker color among the sides of the canvas. Whatever color or paint that was left on the brush, it got blended into the middle. Once that bottom layer dried, I got back in and I added a second coat of the raw sienna to deepen that color at the bottom floor area. Now it's time to start lighting up the sky and adding in some dimension. So I took that blue, I added in some purple, a little bit of white, then I brushed that blend right across the sky. I used my sponge to soften the edges and blend it smoothly into the previous layer. For the final sky layer, I lighten the mix by adding even more white to that blue. The brighter color goes mainly in the center and slightly downward towards where the floor will start. Again, I use my sponge to blend everything together. To finish the sky, I thin out some white water. I dipped my toothbrush in it, and I used that water to thin out my white paint. Then I took my toothbrush and I dipped it into it. I took a cardboard and I covered the floor area, and then I flicked the brush to create stars. Once the painting dried, it was time for the mixed media part to begin. So I grabbed my scissors. I carefully cut around the drawing from the canvas paper, and then I glued the cutout right onto the painted canvas panel. Now I'm switching over to my color markers to bring the characters to life. I start by tracing all the characters with a black marker to clean up the lines. Using a dark brown marker, I color in the skin tones and the legs of the manger. Then with a darker and lighter blue, I fill in the bottom area of the cutout under the manger so it blends smoothly into the background of the canvas. Next, I add the first layer of coloring to the clothing. For Mother Mary and Baby Jesus blanket, I use a dark mossy green. For Joseph, I use the same dark brown from the skin tone as the base color for his clothes and head wrapping, and I use black for his beard. Mother Mary's head covering gets a medium gray as the first layer, and her hair is filled in with black. For the hay under Jesus, I start with the color orchid. Once that's done, I go back under the characters with black. Well, go back around them, with black again to sharpen the outlines. Now it's time for the second layers. I add a lighter green on top of Mother Mary's clothes and Jesus' blanket. For Joseph, a layer of orchid over his clothes and head wrap. Then I take a light brown marker and shade over the dark brown to soften Mother's Mary's skin tone. I make sure to leave the darker brown on the neck for a natural shadow. Jesus gets the same lighter tone for his face, and Joseph keeps the darker brown for his skin. Mother's Mary head covering gets a layer of white on top, and Joseph clothing gets a third layer using yellow. Finally, I use a light peachy shade for the second layer of the hay and the legs of the manger. For the last part of the video, I'm switching back to my acrylic paint to pull everything together and finish the piece. I start by using a chalk to draw a vertical line down the center of the canvas to give me a guide for painting the shed. Next, I mix raw sienna with yellow to add more depth and texture to the floor area. Using that same mix, I paint in the base color of the shed. Then I add white to raw sienna and yellow mix to start building up the highlights on the shed. For the star, I painted first yellow, then add a layer of white on top to brighten it. With some of that leftover white, I add a highlight along the top of the shed. And using just yellow again, I add a soft highlight to the floor. To finish everything off, I take my artist pen and give baby Jesus his smile and eyes. Then I add line work around the characters, the shed, and the star to bring the whole piece together. All right, everybody, this is it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed creating this piece with me. If you made your own nativity art, let me know in the comments. See you all in the next tutorial. Bye bye.